Holiday, it's our hustle culture. Sunday is the only day we get. You're here instead of a siesta. Wonderful lunch in the afternoon, I hope. Yes, let's hear it. Alrighty. Wonderful. So the only thing I can say is all of you are here for your love of food, for your love of books, and of course for the love of my wonderful panelists here today. Right? So can we hear that round of applause again? Lovely, lovely. Okay, I'm going to go back a little in time to something that affected all of us. The pandemic, yes? Right. So what happened during the pandemic to most of us, those of us who were privileged to stay completely closed up in our houses, most of us turned to food. Most of us turned to cooking, if we managed it. Some of us cooked to save our lives. And for a few others, it was like a chonk. It was an uplifter. It was something that we did so that we could feel better when the walls were closing in on us. I think most of you would agree with me there, right? Okay, maybe we have kind of a silent audience here. I'd really like to hear you guys. This is food we're talking about. Anyway, thank you. All right, so during the pandemic, Abhijit, Cheyenne, your second book, Chonk, which just released, is a result of work that was done in the pandemic. But you had a book before that as well, Cooking to Save Your Lives. What was this progression story like? How did Chonk happen? How did Cooking to Save Your Life happen?
And actually, Cooking to Save Your Life came out after the pandemic. Came out in late 2021, and when we were sort of, the book came out, we were very excited, and then in some sense we were kind of sitting around trying to think of, okay, this was nice, but that's it, that's the end, and that seemed wrong. So we tried to figure out what to do, and the first 5 things we thought of, we couldn't do. We were going to write a blog, but I can't really write anything without spending a month thinking about it. So that was not going to work. We're going to run a live website. Well, I can't respond to emails before, I have 80,000 unanswered emails. So therefore that was not going to work, etc. So so therefore we were then kind of floundering around thinking of what we could do, and we came up with this idea of writing a Sunday column for Times of India. And this book is really 24 columns plus 3 essays that we wrote to bring together the themes in the columns. That's the book. Plus, because in a Sunday column, one recipe already eats up too much of the space. I added about 55 recipes to it as well.
But I guess one more reason to do the Chonk book is that we felt that the first book was nice, but it was also a bit expensive with lots of colors, images, a bit too few to read also. It was more like a gift, and we wanted to address also a much larger audience and to concentrate also on India. So all the columns in the new book are only about India or India in relation to other countries.
Lovely. Okay, so the opening line of your book, The Cooking to Save Your Life, you say that you have cooked meals since you were 15 years old, and you completely enjoy doing that as well. So my question to you is, the idea that cooking is a life skill and not just a woman's domain anymore is something that's permeating society all through. But do you think the basic interest in cooking is necessary to be able to turn out, say, even everyday meals or even those gourmet meals?
I think that it's a good question. I think that it's really, I think what the pleasure of cooking. So many people have to cook because they have to cook. Sadly, we live in a society where many people do things for reasons that are nothing to do with pleasure. If you want to cook with pleasure, you better be greedy. Yeah, I think that's the first order. The cooking with pleasure is about imagining food. If you really can't imagine the excitement of eating it, I don't think cooking can be a pleasure. So I think cooking is for me, it's really It's rooted in the fact that I'm intensely greedy. I eat a meal, and 5 minutes later, I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to eat. So,
I'm sure a lot of us do here, right? I mean, I'm always thinking of my next meal, what am I going to cook next, and stuff like that. Shane, coming to the illustrations in a book, illustrations are not really the traditional way of going about a cookbook right now, especially when you have social media with these really glossy pictures and cookbooks that are coming out as coffee table books with amazing pictures. Why did you decide to go, both of you in collaboration, why did you decide to go down the illustration way? And what has that journey been like?
Well, I guess first we cooked together before doing the book or before thinking even about the book. We cooked together. I cooked most of the dishes that are in the first book, many of the dishes that are in the second. So I guess the first common interest was food and how to cook. And Abhijit taught me about Indian food. And then I'm an illustrator, so I guess it naturally came to the illustration. I think what I don't like so much about photographs of food is that they don't leave any scope for interpretation. You know exactly how it's supposed to look like, and I feel it's a bit frustrating also because most of the time you don't have the same light, you don't have the same ingredients, you don't have the same skill also, so it often looks a bit more disappointing. So I guess the illustration also, in many of the illustrations, the food is not the centerpiece. What we really wanted to bring out was the fact that social life happens around food. So many of the illustrations are a little about food, but mostly about people eating together, about people cooking food, about people cleaning after having eaten. It's about the interaction, the side glances. It's about the places where they eat. So in many of the illustrations, you'll find that it happens outside of the kitchen or outside of the dining table. I think that is allowed by the illustration, and there are also some things you really cannot show in a photograph because the illustration will bring out an idea. So for example, in a piece, we went to the Bara Imambara in Lucknow, so there is a piece about the Bara Imambara, and Abhijit thought about linking that to the topic of food relief. And he also wanted to, historically, but he also wanted it to be about how difficult it is for the poor to get food relief. So I represented a maze that is both the actual maze in the Bara Imambara, but also the idea of a maze for poor to get food relief. So that you really can't do it in a photograph.
So maybe I add a little bit to it. In Cooking to Save Your Life, I think one of the things we emphasize is a meal is about telling a story. And there's stories, each recipe comes with a story as well. And I think telling story, so presenting a meal is about telling a story. And the style of illustration that especially Cheyenne does is very much a storytelling style. And so I think we both wanted to invoke that connection to storytelling. I think that's very much a part of that book. And since then, I think one of the things we've tried to do is weave the food, the recipe, into stories, taken from my life. So all the essays come with a little bit of, memorializing and a lot of then discussion of social issues. But it is about constructing narratives that have a certain natural flow. It's not about bang 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 bang. So I think there's clearly an impulse towards storytelling that makes the book the way it is.
Okay, taking off on that point, what have been the challenges or say the happy parts of writing a cookbook versus the more academic, economic, social scientist work that you do?
Oh, I mean, it's a great question. What is the pleasure of writing is really I think what is nice about food is that it's both immediate for all of us, but somehow also connected to any number of social issues. It's very easy to make the transition from food to whatever, caste or various kinds of conflict or migration. When we migrate, we think about the foods. When we cook, we create whatever. We use energy. So you connect it to a million things, and each essay connects it to a different thing. So I think the pleasure is this game. I want to connect it to several things, to my own memories, my childhood often, but also my family life, and to my children often come in. So, and to connect it to some economic question or question in a critique of economics, something to do with economics or social science generally, and something to do with India, and something to do with the sort of my general sort of greediness. So I think what the pleasure is to fit them together like a pieces of a jigsaw. How do you put all of those things together in 1,700 words?
Okay, fitting the pieces of a jigsaw together. So my next question's to you, Cheyenne. In this jigsaw puzzle, working on illustrations, what's that been like, saying, working with an idea that Abhijit comes up with, to translate that into an illustration, yet keep the tone of you as an artist alive as well, the balance that has to be maintained? How has that been?
Well, actually, we conceive the column together. We don't. It's not. I guess you can see the illustrations as being a little bit done by Abhijit, and the text as being a little bit done. No, not literally, but I will often ask in the process, Abhijit, how is this person dressed? Is this the right gesture? What should I put it in background? So I often share with him the very first sketches, but he also shares the very first draft. And we have a list of topics we would like to take on. So we very much do it together. So I would like people to see it as one piece that is complementary rather than seeing it as a text on one side and the illustration on the other. And I would say for me, but I guess also for you, it's the fact that it's a monthly column. It's really a great game to play because we have 1 month to produce it, so we cannot. Often we will reduce the scope of the topic. We will decide that this is a very important topic, but in fact, what we want to treat this month is this, and we'll go back to it in 2 months. So we have this list, and we keep feeding it, wondering if we are not repetitive also, because we keep, I guess, coming back to the same topic. So we also have to change. We realized in the process that we go to more and more dire topic, which is also a huge challenge to make it not only grim. It's a Sunday morning column. You don't want to hear. You want to make people think about very important matters, but you also want to, I guess, spark a little hope or a little pleasure or a little humor. And the fact that it happens every month, basically, it's a renewed interest. We set ourselves the challenge of writing something interesting, not repetitive, in 1 month. And for the drawing also, I will try different scenes, different characters. I will often ask Abhijit, no, I've done that the previous month. I want to do something else. So it's very much like
It's
that.
quite the collaborative process.
Yes, very much.
Have you ever had disagreements that you had to sort out, like, I don't think this works with this text, I think your text needs to do this, or I think your illustration needs to do that? Can you tell us a story, maybe?
Yeah. We often have disagreements. I think first, about the text, I'm still an economist, and there is still this instinct to use jargon and to bring numbers, too many numbers, and to confuse the reader, and to do the snow job that we often do of piling so much arguments on that people can't actually see the wood for the leaves. So I think it's all of that, and then Cheyenne will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So then I have to, but I think there's sometimes a more substantive disagreement, and about the way on issues on. So for example, on the issue of we did this piece on women's Actually, let me talk about a different piece. That piece wasn't in this book. We did a piece about people who are very sick. And this was motivated by the fact that Cheyenne spent not 2 years before, her father passed away a year ago. Before that, she spent 2 years taking care of him. He was very sick. He was very young, unfortunately, my age really, and was very sick. And in that process, so I was trying to write about that, about how, how we deal with tragedy, in a sense. Food is also a part of that. We have to feed people, even sick people. So and in that process, I think my instinct was to think of it as, when she said, told me a story about the fact that, her father would ask for something, say, I want to eat this, and then when she makes it, he wouldn't eat it. And I had written it saying that, well, and being sick makes us so that we don't know what we really want. And I think that upset her a lot. She said, no, you missed my point. Point is, the sickness itself, your mouth goes dry suddenly, and then you don't want to eat anything. So it's not about me being irresponsible and just saying, I want that, I want that. It's really about the physiology of disease. And so we had a rather intense conversation about that. I would say I fixed it after that.
But I guess I'm also I'm allergic to numbers, so this does not go well sometimes, and I often remove half or 3/4 of the statistics. So it has to speak to someone like me who has no training in economics, who has an interest in economics, but who is also not ready to, I guess, digest so much in one piece. So we are very careful about the flow. So a lot of the time I will disagree about where to put, I guess, the sentence, the piece about the memory, the piece about the food. Sometimes the food is a bit behind, and I want to bring it back. We are really mindful of the rhythm, but also the equilibrium. It should be light, playful, but also have some content.
All right. I'm going to switch tacks now. I'm going to read a very, very tiny paragraph out of Cooking to Save Your Life. And this is one thing that really resonated with me because I've had equal number of disasters in the kitchen myself. So Abhijit says, in fact, I often plan entire dinners with some redundancy built into them. That way, if one course is really inedible, I can throw it out. Just remember not to throw freshly burnt sauce into the plastic bag in the trash can as I once did. It'll burn through the bag and flood your kitchen with the ineffable odor of burnt plastic with cinnamon dressing, or whatever it is you happen to be cooking. I've had enough of these disasters myself, including having turned a pressure cooker with rice in it onto sim and leaving it for 2 hours and leaving the house, and then having an entire house smell like burnt rice and burnt pressure cooker. It is not a good smell, trust me. But Abhijit, I wanted to ask you, is humor a natural part of your personality, or is that the cookbook writer in you? Because your book is peppered with a lot of it. How many of you have ever cut an onion by measuring it by the size of your lobe, your earlobe? Because that's the instructions in the book. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because when I read it, the first thing I did was, let me just touch my earlobe and see how thick it is. So, yes.
I mean, that was not humor, that's practical. This thing of 3/4 of a teaspoon, this kind of crap, I mean, who knows what 3/4 of a teaspoon is? Who knows what a teaspoon is? It's 5 milliliters, 3/4 is 3.75 milliliters, measure it. I mean, it's sort of, there's so much fake scientism in all of these things. I figured that, what I do mostly is I go, I do actually have a teaspoon, but most of the time I eyeball it, and most cooks eyeball it. And so I wanted to kind of set that standard. Don't pretend that you have like deep science in every step, and you just don't have the time, don't have the patience. So let's put some reality into this process, and part of that was signaling that. So it's actually important, not so much for the humor, but for actually making the context of cooking real. I think we don't know. Often the measurement that are offered, 142 grams of sugar. This doesn't work in most kitchens. So I was more working on that. I don't know. I guess it's not exactly modest to say, yes, humor is part of my, but I'd say one thing, just advertise something else. I did do a set of videos with somebody who's a kind of certified humorist, Sarnath Banerjee, who's a graphic novelist who's well known for his humorous drawings. So I did a set of videos with him, and so they have an attempt to be me, maybe just a failed attempt to be funny, but I do like trying to be funny. Maybe I failed.
Okay. I totally loved it when in one of your recipes, in the ingredients list, Abhijit says that also if you happen to have a young teenager at home or someone within a very young age group who's willing to sit and pluck mint or coriander with you, that would be a great part of the ingredient list to have along with you. So I have a teenager at home. I'm not sure if I can get her to pluck mint with me, but she's great in the kitchen. So for me, it just resonated on so many levels, which is why I think this is a cookbook that a lot of us would really appreciate. But Abhijit, let's talk about, say, globalization right now and its impact on food. Do you think it has led to more cuisines and more food being known to more people around the world, or is it adding to the trouble of, say, dilution and of misappropriation possibly? Because that's a discussion that happens very often in the food sector. So what do you think about it?
I'm less worried about misappropriation. I mean, I'll confess that there are recipes in chalk which are attempts by Cheyenne and me to change the way we present Indian food, inspired by European cooking and the reverse. So there's both examples of both. And I think, so I'm less worried about the appropriation question, because it seems to me that the question of, sometimes ownership here is, I don't think any of us own any recipes. I think if you eat food in Ethiopia or in Yemen, you'll think, okay, did we get this food from them, or they got it from us? There's clearly these continuities in food which are very, very much very historical, and and for that matter in all other aspects of culture as well. And I think to pretend that we will at this moment, the current Kannada cuisine is somehow authentic and that it has no other ties to anything is, I think, fake. So I'm not interested in that particular version of the appropriation question. And there are versions of the appropriation question, like America patenting turmeric. Those questions I'm willing to deal with, but not at this level of individuals in their own homes trying to experiment with things. I think there's great pleasure in that. I think on the globalization, I think the thing that has clearly, I think, permeated most societies in the world is a certain form of easy foods. And I do think that there is a trade-off there. I understand why people like easy foods, because people's lives are busy, they're getting busier, it's stressful, but ordering a pizza is easy. But it's also a way of sort of lowering your standards. What we eat as pizza in India, alas, most of the time, if we were given the equivalent of that in as sambar sadam, we would throw it in the trash. I mean, I really do think that the standards are important, and that we should expect, because it's pizza, it's foreign, it's whatever, then it's we don't need to uphold our standards. That particular thing is, I think, damaging for all cultures. And I think in all cultures in America, we have this Indian food, we're going to eat spicy today. So then we go to a restaurant, and the restaurant just sells you basically, they give you even the number of chilies as well as next to the recipe, 6 chili recipes. And you show that, you eat those to show that you have hair on your chest. It's a very, it's really awful combination. It kills all the taste because there's way too much spice and way too little anything else. And so I really think that the particular form of appropriation, I think, is damaging. We're doing it in a way that's sort of playing to the lowest common denominator.
So in that sense, and this is a question as a food writer I get very often, what would you say is the best way that chefs, writers, illustrators can take Indian food to the world? Because the entire conversation is that people still don't know what Indian food is, let alone regional Indian food. So what would you think is the best way for us to take our cuisine out there?
This has been my project for the last few years since Abhijit told me how to make a palak paneer, and I messed it up for the first time, and then I understood what a chonk was and that I should not infuse the spices for 3 minutes rather than 30 seconds. But I don't like so much the Indian food that we find in France, which is mostly Punjabi food, North Indian food. I much prefer Bengali or South Indian. And so I try to make actually most of the dishes that are in this book to my friends, to my family. I cooked Bengali food for 15 people in Finland once. I really try to, I try to find, but when I do that, I won't do a Karela dish, for example, even though you can find perfectly good Karela in Paris. I will go for something that is the best in between. Or there are some recipes, for example, in the south of France, you have what is called the papeton. It's a eggplant
custard,
flan, like a custard. And we made it in a Bengali way with kalonji, with a chonk also, and with a mango chutney. So this is a way to make it with Indian flavors while building on a perfectly French Provençal dish. So I think it's also finding the good in between, is being curious about what the food is and trying to find the similarities with the, I guess, the ingredients or the techniques that you know already.
Exactly. So let me say one, add to that. So I think food, recipes, styles of recipes, classes of recipes are ideas. They're strategies. They're strategies that you can appropriate for many different purposes. And I think one of the things that, I think by talking about the authentic, we often obscure the fact that the authentic is a set of moves. It's a set of specific things, and it's a set of techniques that once you understand what those techniques are good for, they can be used for many things. I could cook Brussels sprouts in South Indian style. It's wonderful, in my view. I'm a bit vain maybe there, but it really is the case that you can cook Brussels sprouts. If you wanted to cook artichokes, I could cook it also South Indian style. It's a matter of sort of figuring out what is the grammar of a recipe, not a matter of paying homage to all the gestures that surround it, that this is a traditional dish. It's not the dish that matters, it's the idea behind the dish.
Okay. Would you like to add a point? No. Okay. Right. Abhijit, from your perspective as an economist, how have you approached the structure of both your books? Do you find parallels between, say, just working on a cookbook per se, or bringing the economist perspective to it? Did you find parallels? What was that like?
So I think what we've been trying to do to economics in my work with Esther, my wife Esther Duflo, is to tell stories and to try to make economics useful and accessible to people by trying to argue that we're always telling stories and that economics is as much a domain for finding the right powerful, insightful narrative. It's not about sort of a set of assertions about, this is how the world works and therefore this is how we should do, but rather an invitation to think about, something that's happening in the world through the lens of, these are possible mechanisms that could be working. So to identify mechanisms. And in some ways, a cookbook, cooking is the same thing. It's a set of mechanisms. That's what I was trying to say before. That what is common to the act of cooking and the act of doing economics is that you're diagnosing. Here's a problem. Here's the diagnosis. This is what will solve it. And that's sort of the same mindset when you do a dish. The second thing I want to say is that, and beyond that, Chalk in particular is an attempt to tell stories about economics, to use economics as to present economics not as something that's kind of fixed and kind of handed to you, but rather as something that is a part of a social discourse that we should all be part of.
Just to give an example of that, also when sometimes we start from one of the three corners between a memory, a piece on economics or sociology, and the food angle. And sometimes we have to drag the food angle from the economics or drag the economics from the food angle. So for example, in one of the last columns, that is not in the book, but is in the columns in Times of India, we wanted to talk about the women's participation in the household chores and the fact that women were thinking about the full spectrum of tasks that have to be done and the micro tasks in between, etc. And this was adding to the mental load. And when we were thinking about a recipe that would go with that, we thought of a recipe which involves many, many different steps that you have to do the day before, that you have to anticipate, you have to prepare, get someone to help, etc. So this is also a way to pair the theme of the piece and the recipe.
So my questions can go on and on, but I'm now going to open up the stage to the lots of hands that are going up right now. So do we have someone running around with the mic? That's right. We'll come to you too.
Thanks for this panel. My question is about the geopolitics of food. One observation I made during my travels and meeting with people of other races is that Indian food, chicken tikka and kebabs and biryani is very popular in England. Mexican and Vietnamese food is very popular in America. Falafel and all is very popular in Israel. Seems like a pattern that every time a country loses, the cuisine wins. So as an economist, do you agree with it, and why does it happen?
Sorry, you said a country loses?
The cuisine wins, the food wins. When a country loses the geopolitical battle, the cuisine survives and it thrives actually. That's been my observation.
I think that there is I think that I don't know that those oppositions are particularly helpful to me. I would say I think that, for example, Mexico was not a US colony, whereas India was a British colony. So it's a bit that more, I would say, Mexicans have brought. So it's migration. There's a series of. The book Chalk is a lot about those processes of how food moves across the world. So I don't want to. I guess I feel like the book is so much takes that idea of food moving very seriously. So I don't want to. I think this is a particular simplification that I find less helpful. I mean, I'm not sure. For example, how much of the fact that chicken tikka is so dominant in the UK is because the British colonized India, and I think there was a fair amount of that. The British went back with a desire to have that kind of food. They had their khansamas here make those kinds of food, and there was also immigration from India, and I don't know which one is more important. So I don't want to take a stand on that.
Yes, the lady in the lovely blue sari.
Hi, my name is Banerjee. Huge fan.
Thank you.
Since we are talking about Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we are talking about food and we are sitting in front of an economist, I was wondering about like if you have a comment on global food inflation, which has been soaring, and what your outlook is, and how that would impact like just cooking in general.
I mean, I think part of the, I think right now we're in a place where you can exactly see that real incomes at the bottom are really having a hard time keeping up with inflation, and I think that reflects two things. One is the fact that for a variety of I think ecological reasons, our supply chains are increasingly disrupted. So I think this is something that I think in the next few years we will become much more conscious of just how much of our standard supply chains have been disrupted, and there was a period where vegetable growing, for example, vegetable is where you see dramatic inflation, for example. Vegetable growing around cities was very much something that, developed, around Mumbai, around Kolkata, around Bangalore. There are these villages that supply vegetables. Part of what's happened in those places is that the water table is receding. Part of what's happened in those places is that there is the city is moving there, the land is being used for other purposes. So there's a bunch of ecological changes that are happening which are being reflected, I think, especially in urban vegetable prices. And I think that's that it seems like something that is sufficiently interesting that I have actually looked a little bit, and I don't see a really convincing study of it. It's not something that I personally have great expertise of, but you can see roughly what the patterns are there.
Okay, we have a question here, and I see two other hands there. I have just 4 minutes with me, so let's try and catch as many questions as we can. Yes, go.
Hi, hello. Abhijit, I have a question. So writing Poor Economics, that is about eradication of poverty, and writing this cookbook, that is about eradication of hunger. So how do you shift your persona between these two paradigms?
So I think this is not about eradication of hunger. It's really, so I wish that's
it's a simplification for me.
Perfectly good parallel maybe for somebody else, but this book is about enjoying eating. I think the parallel is more, and I would say in both of the books, I think one of the points we make is that if you want to think about the eradication of poverty, I think one of the first things you think about is that the poor also have pleasure in their life.
Right.
That pleasure is important. One of the points we make in the first chapter of Poor Economics is that if you imagine that people will live their lives eating the most efficient way, eating peanuts and boiled eggs all the time and bananas, that's just not a life. People want pleasure, they want excitement, they want occasionally a pakoda or even a slice of pizza, much as I disparaged it. So I think that there is a space for pleasure, and I think that point we make in Poor Economics, and that's still the impetus of these books.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I do see hands up. I'm not sure how many we can take, so try and make your question as brief as possible, and we'll try and accommodate as many. Otherwise, we will take this offline. Yes.
Yeah, hi. So my question is around proliferation of YouTube recipe channels. They are very popular, right? So what do you think about them? And do you have any plans to have your own YouTube channel?
I totally hate seeing myself in videos, so no.
In the context of global warming and the reduced per capita availability of water, what's your views about moving away from meat-based and rice-based food? I mean, food habits, rather.
In fact, the next column, I think, is on partly on that. And it's in particular on, I mean, there are many different versions of that statement, but the one that relevant in this piece is not growing, especially rice in Punjab and Haryana. I think that's going to be good in every possible way. And we have to do something to get there. So that piece is a little bit about that.
Okay, we are out of time for questions. I see one hand up. Maybe quickly, can we get a mic here?
This is for Abhijit. Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to check if social media has ever influenced your cooking or your approach to cooking over the times. You said you've been cooking since you're 15. So up till
There was no social media.
No, I know. But from the time now that social media has come and all the information that has been going around, has it ever influenced your cooking?
You know, it depends on what you mean by social media. I browse Pinterest a lot. And so